Welcome back to your nightmares, my children. This is Mr. Midnight speaking. I welcome you all to my humble abode. So today we will look at two scary, snow-filled winter horror stories. Let's welcome winter with two terrifying stories. And always remember, the darkness always follows. I will now leave you with my narrator. So enjoy.
You can't hide in the snow. Hello, for the past week I have been unable to sleep at first. I did not know why, and now I am beginning to think I was sensing something watching me. After 3 nights of being woken up for no reason at 3 a.m., I found something outside in the snow. I went outside to grab wood for my fire and saw footprints in the snow leading to my window. Now, it should be said that I live on a pass in Washington, and it's not exactly highly populated. The only reason I can think of someone trekking through 5 feet of snow to my window would be to get help. However, no one knocked to wake me, which made me begin to feel uneasy. I put on my snowshoes and went to investigate. Perhaps I had just missed the tracks the day before and there was nothing to worry about. As I got close to the tracks, I realized how huge they were. I mean, large, which is the snow isn't the craziest thing. However, they looked to be bare footprints. I could still see the toes outlined in the snow. This made my stomach turn. So I stepped in the tracks to cover up my fear as I followed the trail into the woods behind my house. The tracks stopped, however, still within a view of my house, at the base of a large snow-covered tree. I looked up and saw nothing. I looked around and saw no signs of movement in the snow. I tried to brush it off as perhaps my own tracks and the snow simply made them look large and barefoot. I knew this made no sense, but I had to sleep alone in the woods and could not do so wondering if someone had visited me overnight. About a week went by and nothing happened out of the ordinary. I slept just fine and saw no tracks. After a week, the tracks had finally vanished beneath the new layer of snow, and I fell into my usual routine, forgetting about my nighttime visitor. That night I awoke at 3 a.m. again from a terrible nightmare. I was outside of my body, floating outside my home at night. I saw a tall, thin man peek out from behind a tree in the woods above my house. He looked wrong, too pale, too tall, and barely clothed. He made his way down to my window. What really freaked me out was he was barefoot and seemed to be weightless, trudging through at least 6 feet of snow, and he never began to sink to his knees in it. I saw him go to my window, and it was then that I was transported back into my body. I sat up still, dreaming, and saw him with one long white hand on my window. He was drooling and had a sadistic smile on his face. He saw my movement and began to drag his nail down the window pane. I jolted awake from the dream and sat up in bed, turning on my bedside light. I took a deep breath and began to calm myself down. I didn't want to look at the window, but I knew I had to. Sure enough, there was no man there. As I stood up to fuel the fire, the light caught the pane of glass, and I saw a quickly fading handprint. I froze and felt a chill up my spine. I went to the window, assuming I had touched the glass in my sleep. But when I went to wipe it clean, I realized the print was from the outside of the window, not inside. I stayed up the rest of the night next to the fire with my shotgun in hand, waiting for nothing, and yet I felt I was not alone in the woods. With the first rays of sunlight, I went outside. I expected to see someone in the woods looking down at me, but there was no one. It was then that I saw the tracks, the exact same as before. large, barefoot, and shallow, as if the snow held its weight without any give. I left the house that day and went to stay with my family. I can't tell you why I was so frightened, but I knew I could not stay another night, even though it was only footprints. I knew deep down it was something else out in those woods, and if I gave it the chance, it would come inside. Years later, I was told by a neighbor that there was folklore in that area about a man who had died of hypothermia in the 90s out in the woods. He could not find his way back home after a snowstorm, and wandering until he lost his mind in the cold and began to take off his clothes. They found him outside his own house by a window that was hidden in the snow, barefoot and barely clothed. It was a cold and windy night. In the middle of the night, I was awakened by a loud noise coming from the front door. It was a cold, windy night, so I thought the trash bin crashed onto the door. The thought completely disappeared when I heard a voice. "Hey!" a stranger yelled, knocking the door. Because I lived about a mile away from an old apartment complex where frequent crimes took place, I swiftly got up and walked towards the closet. I grabbed an old double-barreled shotgun with my left hand and loaded 2 shells with my right. Whoever it is knocking at 3:30 a.m. won't be knocking when they see this, I mumbled as I made my way downstairs. While looking out the window from the side of the house, I turned the outside light on. My windows were blurred, so I couldn't see a clear image of the person. However, some of the features were noticeable. The unusual height of the man was enough to startle me. He stood about 7 feet tall, wearing a white suit with a black tie. The tip of his nose barely touched the wooden frame above the door. The hair from his head wrapped all the way down to his chin. I stared at the person for about 2 minutes until he finally moved. I stepped back, hoping he wouldn't see me. As I was returning back to my spot, the man slowly walked across the side window, the exact window I was looking through. My heart stopped beating. The tension built as the sound of something scraped across the glass. "Hey!" the stranger yelled again. I didn't move because only the side of his head was visible. His eyes were following the long, crooked nose from his face. As the wind picked up, I barely heard him say, "I'm going inside from the back." I was beyond scared that my hands began sweating from tightly gripping the shotgun. I completely forgot I had it with me. I started making my way towards the back of the house, ready to blow someone's head off if necessary. I made it to the guest room that had a window with a nice view of the back door. Unfortunately, I forgot to change the light bulb in the backyard, so I was watching the guy in the pitch black standing at the door. In the room, I could hear a brief giggle behind my ear. Suddenly, I hear the sound again. A large bang at the door. "What are you doing? Open the damn door!" he screamed, turning his head towards me. He knew my location because he was looking at me. We were watching each other for a minute until he turned back. Another knock echoed across the rooms. However, there was no voice, just the sound of a rusty door opening. As I was looking through the window from the guest room, the white suit vanished as he entered into the darkness. For the longest time, I was aiming the gun towards the doorway. I didn't see anyone and didn't hear anything the rest of the night. However, the smell of burning tobacco seeped through the crack. I promised myself not to fall asleep that night. Unfortunately, I fell asleep. I woke up the next morning happy to be alive. I thought it was just a dream. When I opened the door, There was no sign a person was in my room. I investigated all the doors, especially the back door, but there was no sign of a break-in. I convinced myself to put the old shotgun back where it belonged. So I took out the shells from the gun and opened the closet. I put everything back the way it was earlier. The shotgun was rested neatly on the shelf, and the shells were placed in the box. The day went by too fast. I didn't want it to be night again. I was lying on my bed ready to fall asleep. I was in a tranquil state. My ears were focused on the sound of wind blowing against the house. My glazed eyes were focused on the shadows of a tree hitting the wooden floor in my room. I abruptly stopped focusing on the wind when I heard a door swing open. The shadows from the tree were interrupted by a gently moving shadow shaped of a man. I got up from the bed to flip the switch, but there was no electricity. The heavy wind had caused the power outage, and I was out of luck because I couldn't recall where I last placed the flashlight. The sound of dragging feet made my teeth cringe. Searching frantically for the closet door, my dependent mind was only thinking about the shotgun. I was like a druggie looking for the next fix. "Damn it! Where is it?" I screamed, as my hand finally made contact with the knob. As I placed my hand on top of the shelf, I noticed the weapon was missing. In shock, my hand slowly moved down to search for the shelves, but the box was empty. I realized what was dragging on the floor wasn't feet at all. It was the shotgun. Stunned, I stood helpless in the dark, listening to every little noise around me. I had my first glance at the man when he walked over to the window. The moon's light reflected on the suit as his arm sluggishly moved and opened it. As the window opened, a gust of wind entered and the coldness engulfed my room. When he turned around, his glowing eyes locked onto mine. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered in a dark tone as he lifted both legs over the window. He then pushed himself off the two-story building. Afraid to look out the window, I crept across the room in slow motion. I hesitantly looked down, but the yard was vacant. There was no sign of that person. As the night continued, I found myself crying at an old picture of my son who died 3 years ago. Without my consent, he arranged the trampoline just below the window from my room. His neck split open after attempting a backflip, while his friends watched. I was working day shift at the time, so I didn't know what happened until later when news arrived through the office phone. The unnatural feeling of falling asleep suddenly hit me. I felt like someone strangled me with a dose of chloroform. I stumbled over my bed and dozed off. In the middle of the night, I was awakened by a loud noise. I woke up from what I thought was a nightmare. I gradually got up, rubbed my eyes, stretched my arms, and chuckled. All the laughter, all the hope, and all the happiness faded when I heard a child's voice coming from outside. "Hey!" the stranger yelled, knocking at the front door. "It's me, Dad!" he yelled, with a joyful manner. "John, is that you?" I asked with a raspy voice. The frequent knocking suddenly stopped, and I heard the door open. When I looked downstairs, the man with the white suit was in the house, greeting the kid. When reality finally set in, I realized he wasn't my son, and the house I was living in didn't belong to me. It belonged to the people who passed away long ago, and I was just their guest.
Well, my children, I thank you all for listening. I hope these 2 stories frightened you and got you in the mood for Halloween. I'll see you again very soon. So until then, love the darkness as it always follows.